Audible है? ठीक है, thank you, ma'am. Right, so we had talked about the trade and commerce of the Chalcolithic people. Now about their houses and habitations, that is their settlement and dwelling pattern. Rectangular and circular houses with mud walls and thatched roofs were the most common types of houses. However, there are variations in the size of houses from site to site. Types of houses also vary from site to site. Reason? हर रीजन का अपना एक क्लाइमेट होगा, तो climatic and ecological adaptations are going to be there. The level of material development is also going to be different, right? So as a result, there is a variation. Ahar people, they built houses on plinths made of schist. तो सीधे ग्राउंड पे नहीं लगाते थे, एक फाउंडेशन क्रिएट करते थे ऑन स्लेट्स और ऑन स्लैब्स मेड ऑफ schist. ठीक है. Walls were built on these plinths with mud or mud brick, and the walls were decorated with quartz cobbles. ठीक है. Floors were made of burnt clay or clay mixed with river gravels. And bigger houses had partition walls and chulhas or hearths and quartz saddle querns in the kitchens. Querns क्या होता है? ओखली, जहां पे ग्रेन्स को ग्राइंड किया जाता था, right? In Malwa, settlements such as those found at Navdatoli, Prakash, Daimabad and Inamgaon, they were quite large. Evidence at Inamgaon also suggests that some kind of town planning was also going on in laying out the settlement. किस तरह का town planning? The kind of extensive town planning visible in the Harappan cities? No, a more rudimentary, a more primitive type of town planning. The majority houses were aligned in the east to west orientation. And although these houses were built close to each other, they had an intervening space which might have served as a lane. तो एक से जुड़े हुए दूसरे houses नहीं होते थे, बीच में open space होता था, right? The houses at Inamgaon were quite large, 7 by 5 meters in dimension, rectangular structures with a partition wall. Around the houses, there was a low mud wall and they had a gabled roof. Gabled roof मतलब a sloping roof. ठीक है. तो sloping roof क्यों रखते होंगे? ज्यादा बारिश होती थी उस समय वहां, right? Inside the house there was a large oval fire pit with raised sides for keeping the fire under control. The houses at Navdatoli were provided with 1 or 2 mouth chulhas in the kitchen. So cooking के लिए जो चूल्हास होते थे वो घर के अंदर ही होते थे, not outside the houses. Grain was stored in deep pit silos. कहाँ पे present होते थे ये silos? In the kitchen itself, right? So in the floor, a compartment was dug out where grains were stored. A significant feature of the Jorwe culture is the presence of a large center in each region. This we have already seen that एक primary settlement होगा और उसके around secondary settlements होंगे. These centers are Prakash, Daimabad and Inamgaon respectively in the valleys of the Tapi, Godavari and Bhima rivers. Jorwe settlement at Daimabad was the largest, around 30 hectares. Prakash and Inamgaon cover about 5 hectares each. What does this indicate? कि primary और secondary levels में settlements divided थे. The economic differentiation and also the political differentiation between these centers. So these centers may have served not only as centers of regional trade and local trade, but also as political centers of their particular regions. Now, a noteworthy feature of the Jorwe settlement at Inamgaon is that the houses of the artisans such as potter, goldsmith, the lapidary, iron carver, etc., where were they located? On the western periphery of the principal habitation area. On the other hand, those of the well-to-do farmers, those of the rich farmers were located in the central part. क्या मतलब हुआ? That occupation-based and class-based division of the settlement was going on. In the center, the richest people are going to live. On the western edge, the artisans are going to live. The size of the artisans' houses is smaller than those of the well-to-do farmers as well. Both these aspects, that is the position and size of the houses, demonstrate social differentiation in terms of a lower position for the artisans in the society. Now, in the case of Inamgaon, we see a particular change. This culture displays clear evolution or clear change and can be divided into two phases, early Jorwe and late Jorwe. Early Jorwe में we find better material conditions. Late Jorwe period में we find decay के signs, right? Early Jorwe houses were large rectangular structures with low mud walls. The houses were laid out in rows with their longer axis in the east to west direction. These houses have an open space in between, which may have served as a road or a lane. On the other hand, in late Jorwe houses, they depict a picture of poverty. Large rectangular huts were no longer constructed. Instead, there were small round huts with a low mud wall in clusters of 3 or 4. तो टाउन प्लानिंग वगैरह ये सब गायब हो जाएगा. The pit silos were replaced by a four-legged storage jar. So instead of digging a pit underneath the floor of the house, now a four-legged jar is going to be kept in the kitchen where grains would be stored. The overall evidence indicates that this shift from early to late Jorwe was due to decline in agriculture as a result of drop in rainfall. So around this boundary, that is around 1000 BC, in the region of Inamgaon, the rainfall seems to have declined, resulting in higher poverty and shortage of food, right? At the close of the second millennium BC, there was a drastic climatic change in western and central India that led to increasing aridity, forcing the people to resort to a semi-nomadic existence. This conclusion is based on calculations of percentage of animal bones found from different phases. पहले वाले पीरियड में ज्यादा एनिमल बोन्स मिलेंगे या कम? ज्यादा मिलेंगे. क्यों? Productivity was higher. They could support larger number of animals. Now it is declining, so fewer animals. It seems that increasing aridity during the late Jorwe period led to the decline of agriculture, and the economy based on farming changed over to sheep or goat pastoralism, right? Now, some of these Chalcolithic sites also have fortification walls around the settlement. We have already discussed these. Iran and Nagda of the Malwa culture and Inamgaon of the Jorwe culture have a fortified mud wall with a ditch around the habitation. Right. Now, take down a question. Discuss the settlement and dwelling pattern of the Chalcolithic cultures of the Deccan and Central India. $200 words or 15 marks. ठीक है. Now, based on the information present in the notes, हमको ये answer construct करना है. What is the note on which we should start the answer? That they represent the next stage of evolution from the Neolithic age, but these settlements and the dwellings were nowhere close to the level of sophistication of the Harappan civilization. And finally, Chalcolithic settlements and dwellings reflected what? Reflected the level of technological development, and what else? The varying ecology. As a result, what are we going to find? Both uniformity as well as regional variations in the settlement and dwelling pattern, right? सबसे पहले इसको लिख लीजिए. The Chalcolithic settlement pattern represents the next stage of evolution from the Neolithic age. The next stage of evolution from the Neolithic age. But are nowhere close to the level of sophistication, nowhere close, but are nowhere close to the level of sophistication of the Harappan civilization. Of the Harappan civilization. Full stop. Due to the wide variability in climate, levels of material advancement, and local tastes, Chalcolithic settlements display a high degree of regional variability. Full stop. At the same time, they share some common features. Now, what do we need to do? One by one, we need to highlight these features of uniformity and diversity. Next point likho. Chalcolithic houses were constructed of a wide variety of materials. Ranging from simple mud huts to mud brick houses to mud brick houses. Full stop. Sub point. In some cases, comma, the houses were constructed on plinths made of schist, while some houses were built directly on the ground. Full stop. Next sub point. Similarly, comma, while river gravel and quartzite pebbles were used to finish floors and walls. In some cases, comma, others were finished with lime, ochre, and even cow dung. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. In most Chalcolithic houses, comma, the hearth or chulha was located inside the house, directly built into the kitchen floor. Similarly, almost every house had its own private grain silo, and private animal enclosure. What is this indicative of? The privatization of something. क्या? Of food sources. ठीक है? So हर फैमिली अपने घर के बाहर अपने एनिमल्स बांध रहा है और अपने घर के अंदर अपने ग्रेन्स को स्टोर कर रहा है. इवन कुकिंग इज डन inside the house to be consumed by people who are living in that house, right? What does all of this indicate? That food has become a private resource rather than a public one. So idea of private ownership is becoming even stronger, right? This indicates the privatization of food sources, of food resources. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट लिखो planning was not a characteristic feature of Chalcolithic settlements. Not a characteristic feature of Chalcolithic settlements. Full stop. After all, the Chalcolithic people lived in rural agro-pastoral communities. Agro-pastoral communities with a small secondary economic base. With a small secondary economic base. With a small secondary economic base. However, the early signs of planning were visible at Inamgaon during the early Jorwe period. During the early Jorwe period. Full stop. This was the largest of all Chalcolithic settlements. And may indicate the early beginnings of what process? Of the process of urbanization. ठीक है? Of the process of urbanization. Okay? Next. Number 4. The do you get to see social differentiation from these settlements or not? देखने के लिए मिलता है, right? तो लिखो social and economic differentiation is visible from the pattern of Chalcolithic settlements and dwellings. Settlements and dwellings. Example, at Inamgaon, comma, the central portion of the settlement had large rectangular houses, comma, evenly spaced, comma, belonging to rich farmers. Full stop. The poorer artisans lived on the western periphery. Lived on the western periphery. ठीक है. Condition of women. See, we cannot say for sure कि चूल्हा घर के अंदर है और ग्रेन्स घर के अंदर स्टोर हो रहे हैं, तो इसका मतलब कि वुमेन की कंडीशन पहले से खराब हुई होगी, because women were also involved in other activities which required them to move outside the household also. For example, gathering activities में they would still be involved. They would be involved even in the fishing activities. Grazing में they would be involved. Milking the cattle, they would be involved. So these kinds of activities they were involved in. Secondly, women would also provide the maximum input when it came to labor for secondary economic activities, production activities. For example, weaving of cotton cloth or knitting of a woolen blanket, etc. इसमें कौन ज़्यादा role play करेगा? Women are going to play an important role. So without a more comprehensive analysis, we cannot say for sure whether the condition of women had appreciably changed from the previous period. अभी जो इंडिकेशंस मिल रहे हैं ऐसा नहीं लगता है कि कोई बहुत मेजर चेंज आया था. ठीक है, तो क्या देखा हमने? सोशल एंड इकोनॉमिक डिफरेंशिएशन वाज विजिबल. नंबर 5, political differentiation. is also reflected from the settlement pattern. How? The settlements are at Iran, Navdatoli, and Inamgaon had mud fortification walls surrounding them. Mud fortification walls surrounding them. Full stop. Further, granaries have also been discovered from Navdatoli, Inamgaon, and Daimabad. What kind of buildings are these? Fortifications and granaries. Public buildings हैं. Write down. These public structures were constructed and maintained at the initiative of a civic body or authority. Specialization of works and complete segregation of men and women's works. So this only indicates the gender-based division of labor. It does not tell us whether the condition of women had depreciated or improved as compared to the previous period, right? In fact, even now, women continue to perform most of the important economic tasks, such as grazing of animals, or maybe even working as farm labor, or providing providing labor for secondary economic activities, etc. So without literary evidence or without even a more comprehensive archaeological evidence, there is no way for us to tell the same. Okay, all right. Political differentiation visible है. Now, in comparison to the Neolithic settlements, do the Chalcolithic cultures appear to be more economically interconnected or less economically interconnected? More economically interconnected. क्यों? Because we find this kind of settlement pattern, right? That these regional centers or primary centers are acting as the regional centers of trade, right? Or local centers of trade, and they are also acting as nodes of regional commerce. So they are connected to each other. This also tells us that economic, you can say, specialization was becoming more advanced, right? So these settlements represented the stage of transformation from rural settlements to urban settlements. लेकिन पूरा ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन कंप्लीट नहीं कर पाए थे ये. ठीक है, तो राइट डाउन the settlement pattern also reflects higher economic interconnectedness. Higher economic interconnectedness. Full stop. The presence of larger primary centers within a cluster of smaller sites indicates that these were the local production and trade centers. Full stop. They also served as nodes of inter-regional trade. They also served as nodes of inter-regional trade. Okay. Now, what kind of a picture does the settlement pattern of the Chalcolithic settlements provide? A picture of stability or a picture of constant change, constant evolution दिखता है, right? Write down. The settlement pattern of Chalcolithic sites suggests a continuous process of economic change or economic transformation. Example, जोरवे कल्चर में it can be divided into early and later Jorwe periods. During the early Jorwe period, what was the status of Inamgaon? It was a picture of prosperity or poverty? Prosperity, rising economic status. But during the period of later Jorwe period, poverty, increasing poverty. Write down. At Inamgaon, comma, there is a clear distinction between the early and later Jorwe periods. Characterized by prosperity and decay. Prosperity and decay. Prosperity and decay. ठीक है? What was the question? Discuss the settlement and dwelling pattern of the Chalcolithic cultures of the Deccan and Central India. तो ये हमने characteristics discuss कर लिए हैं. Now, conclusion. How should we conclude? क्या बोल सकते हैं? That the settlement and dwelling pattern of the Chalcolithic age reflects a culture in a state of stability or flux? In a state of flux. Perhaps it represents the transformation from the prehistoric to proto-historic age. Okay? Why are we saying prehistoric to proto-historic? Because some elements of the settlement and dwelling pattern resemble the same as the Neolithic age, while some represent the civilizational age. हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन, तो दोनों के बीच का है। क्लियर? तो दैट इज द नोट ऑन विच वी कैन कंक्लूड। ये हो गया अपना सेटलमेंट एंड ड्वेलिंग। नेक्स्ट, religious beliefs and practices. Now, religion was an important aspect that interlinked all the centers of the Chalcolithic cultures. The people of the Chalcolithic cultures worshipped things such as the mother goddess and the bull. In Malwa, the bull cult seems to have been predominant. The mother goddess is depicted on a huge storage jar of Malwa as well in an applique design. और क्या दिखाया गया है इस जार पर? She is surrounded by a woman on the right and a crocodile on the left, by the side of which is represented a shrine. What does this indicate? First of all, fertility cult was present, female worship was present, and maybe idol worship may also be going on because of the presence of a shrine. But we cannot say for sure about the last one. पहले तो हम जानते हैं कि fertility cult present था, animal worship was also going on. In a painted design on a pot, a deity is also shown with disheveled hair resembling the Rudra of the later period. Rudra is god of what? Destruction. He is also god of war, right? That means that people may have been praying to this particular deity to protect them. Why? Because this was an extremely violent period. Several settlements were fortified. That means that warfare was an important activity, right? So that may be one of the reasons. The resemblance of this particular deity with Rudra also tells us that the later cultures had inherited the cultural sensibilities of the Chalcolithic people. A painting on a jar is found from Daimabad, which portrayed a deity surrounded by animals and birds such as tigers and peacocks. किससे सिमिलर है? Pashupati of both the Harappan civilization as well as Shiva of the later periods. So once again, religion में एक common link मिलता है Chalcolithic period में. A large number of both the naturalistic as well as stylized lingas have been found from most sites. लिंगा इमेजेस मिल रहे हैं तो इसका मतलब फर्टिलिटी वर्शिप चल रहा था, राइट? फॉर एग्जाम्पल, फर्दर, 2 figurines belonging to the late Jorwe culture found from Inamgaon have been identified as Proto-Ganesh, which was worshipped for success before embarking on an important undertaking. क्या क्या दिख रहा है? First of all, the worship of animals is visible. Secondly, the anthropomorphization of animals is also visible over here. And thirdly, once again, connectivity between present culture and the Chalcolithic culture, that is visible. A large number of fire altars have also been found from the Chalcolithic sites during the course of excavations, which shows that fire worship was a very widespread phenomena among the people. This was inherited from the Harappan people. The people of the Chalcolithic had a belief in the concept of life after death. How do we know? Indicated by the existence of pots and other funerary objects found with the burials of the Malwa and the Jorwe people. Burial practices में क्या peculiarities थी? Disposal of the dead by burial was a common system. Adults as well as children were usually buried in the north-south direction, the head towards the north and legs towards the south. How were adults buried? Adults in a majority of cases were buried in an extended position, whereas children were buried in urn burials, either in single pots or in 2 pots. ठीक है, तो चिल्ड्रन को सीटेड पोजीशन में बेरी किया जाता था एंड एडल्ट्स वर बेरिड इन द एक्सटेंडेड पोजीशन. Adults and also children were buried in a pit which was dug into the house floor and rarely in the courtyard of the house. So why do you think they were kept inside the house and not outside? Because now the idea that human beings had a soul or a spirit that was becoming stronger and stronger. People wanted to keep their loved ones close to them so that they can be close at least in spirit, even if not in form, after the death of their loved ones, right? What does this tell us about the religion of the people? that from being materialistic, it was becoming more and more philosophical now. Ideas such as soul, the afterlife, etc., they were starting to gain prominence in the consciousness of the Chalcolithic people. Finally, during the Jorwe period, in the case of adults, the portion below the ankle was purposely chopped off. What does this indicate? कि सोचते थे कि भूत बन के उठ जाएंगे, अपनी ग्रेव से बाहर निकल जाएंगे, they will start chasing them. So the idea of evil spirits, ghosts, etc., that had also started to emerge. Clear? Now, take down a question. On the basis of archaeology and burial practices, analyze the characteristics of the Chalcolithic religion. How are we going to begin this answer? The Chalcolithic religion represented an amalgamation of old and new practices and beliefs. The Chalcolithic religion represented an amalgamation of old and new practices and beliefs. In other words, it was shaped by the forces, given its shape, shaped by the forces of continuity and change. Continuity and change. Full stop. It reflected the way of life comma, natural environment and inherited traditions of the Chalcolithic communities. ठीक है? Further, the regional characteristics of the Chalcolithic religion displayed both both homogeneity, and variation. ठीक है? Now what do we have to do? One by one highlight the important characteristics of the Chalcolithic religion. Next point लिखो. The Chalcolithic religion was characterized by its characterized by a strong element of animism. A strong element of animism. Full stop. Paintings of bulls, the sun and the moon, and other subjects such as Proto Ganesh, Shiva Pasupati, etc., along with a large number of animal statues and paintings indicate the immense importance, the immense spiritual importance of animals for the Chalcolithic people. Does this come as a shock to you, or was this expected? Why? Because the association of Chalcolithic people with animals had become deeper than ever before. Write down. This was to be expected. Due to the deeper relationship that Chalcolithic people shared with animals. ठीक है? Number 2. Fertility worship. Since agriculture was the main source of subsistence for the Chalcolithic people, comma, fertility was highly valued. Fertility was highly valued. Full stop. In Malwa and Jorwe cultures, the mother goddess and Linga cults were widespread. Were widespread. In the Ahar culture, the snake cult appears to be the most popular. Appears to be the most popular. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट लिखो. Materialism appears to be the main life force behind religion. Full stop. Different rituals were meant to appease the gods so that human desires could be fulfilled. ठीक है? Sub point. The fertility cult is an apt representation of the materialistic basis of religion. Similarly, the worship of a male deity with disheveled hair resembling Rudra of the later period in the Malwa culture represents the worship of the god of war. Worship of the god of war, right? So once again, why were people praying to Rudra? To bless their swords, to bless their bows and arrows, to bless their spears, to protect them against the blows of the enemy, these kinds of things. Once again, to overcome their fears and fulfill their desires. What is this all? Materialism. Next point, number 4. At the same time, the early glimpses of spiritualism or metaphysics, the early glimpses of spiritualism or metaphysics start becoming visible during the Chalcolithic age. During the Chalcolithic age. ठीक है, किस बेसिस पे बोल सकते हैं हम ये? इन दी जोरवे कल्चर, in most cases the dead were buried under the floor of the house. Under the floor of the house. Full stop. This indicates the emergence of the concept of soul. Secondly, the emergence of deities such as Proto Ganesh, who was part human, part animal. What does this tell us? That human beings had now started to weave their own stories with regards to their gods and goddesses. They had started to create mythology, right? क्योंकि इस तरह का being, part animal, part human, for him to come into existence, he must have undergone through some process, na? And what kind of a process could create in such kind of a union? An ordinary human process or a divine process? डिवाइन प्रोसेस, तो इसके पीछे किसी और डिवाइन एजेंसी का हाथ है, राइट? तो दैट मीन्स अ गॉड हु इज कंट्रोलिंग द बिहेवियर ऑफ एनिमल्स एंड ह्यूमन बीइंग्स एज वेल एज वन हु इज इन चार्ज ऑफ द मूवमेंट ऑफ द सन एंड द मून. इस तरह के गॉड के बारे में कोई माइथोलॉजी अब क्रिएट करी जा रही है. तो क्या लिखा है अभी आपने? द इमर्जेंस ऑफ डेटीज such as Proto Ganesh, within brackets, part human and part animal, informs us that human beings that human beings had started creating mythologies of such figures full stop, typically, comma, such mythologies have their own have their own me have their own creation myths किसको बोलते हैं? Every mythology has its own explanation for the creation and destruction of the universe. So that myth is known as the creation myth, right? And who is always given the agency of creation and destruction? The supreme God, Paramatma. तो soul और जो divine soul है, that is the oceanic soul, इन दोनों का concepts emerge हो रहे हैं. So this indicates the early beginnings of spiritualism or metaphysics. What is the line that you have written? Have their own creation myths and involve a supreme creator. तो इन वन सेंस हम क्या देख सकते हैं? दैट्स मटेरियलिज्म तो बेस प्रोवाइड कर रहा है, बट एट द सेम टाइम spiritualism or philosophical aspects of religion are also emerging, are also developing during this period. Next लिखो, number 5. The Chalcolithic period, the Chalcolithic religion was also characterized by the presence of superstitious beliefs and practices. Superstitious beliefs and practices. Example, at Inamgaon, the feet of some dead bodies were chopped off before burial. This indicates a belief in evil spirits and ghosts. This indicates a belief in evil spirits and ghosts. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट लिखो. Number 6. The degree of ritualism, did that remain the same, or does that seem to be rising during this period as compared to the Neolithic age? It seems to be rising. Religion appears to be becoming increasingly ritualistic. Appears to be becoming increasingly ritualistic. What is the basis for such a claim? First of all, at इनामगांव एक पेंटेड जार मिला है एंड उस जार पे क्या इमेजेस मिली हैं? चार इमेजेस मिली हैं. मदर गॉडेस image, the image of a crocodile, the image of a woman, and the image of a fourth thing, something which appears to be a shrine, right? And shrine क्या होता है? A place of worship. If there is a particular place of worship, then there must be someone in charge of looking after it, someone in charge of protecting it, someone in charge of regulating entry to it or access to it, right? And कौन होगा? Priest होगा. And priest का role क्या होता है? As the common medium between humans and God. And how do they communicate between the two? Through the performance of rituals. Okay? So one is this, and secondly, once again, from Inamgaon only, we have found evidence that people belonging to the same family, they must be following the same religion only, right? But they are buried in different manners. है कि नहीं? Elders, how are they buried? Directly in an extended burial. Whereas children are given a pit burial. Most of them are buried in the seated position, right? That means distinct rituals were involved in the burial of elders and children. Now, if distinct rituals are involved in the funerary practices, that means that human beings must also have had to undergo different rituals for reaching different stages of their life. Okay? So, this also indicates the rising ritualism within society. Clear? Write down. समझ में आया ना ये? हाँ. क्या लिखा है अभी आपने लाइन? Religion appears to be becoming increasingly ritualistic. Subpoint. At Inamgaon, a painted jar with the image of a shrine indicates the emergence of idol worship, sorry, indicates the emergence of idol worship, comma, priesthood, and ritualism. Next point. Similarly, the presence of separate burial practices or separate ritualistic burials for adults and children also indicates the rising trend of ritualism. ठीक है? So these are some of the important characteristics of the Chalcolithic religion. How can we conclude this answer? क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? That like all other aspects of Chalcolithic life, its religious beliefs and practices characterize a common link between the Harappan culture and Vedic culture. Between the Harappan culture and Vedic culture. Okay? It had elements of both. But formed a distinct religious system of its own, or but represented a distinct religious system of its own. Clear? So it shows the cultural continuity as well as change. That is what we are trying to say over here. Right? ये हो गया Harappans का religion. Now, some minor aspects. Their administrative organization, this we have largely addressed in the Chalcolithic culture. Chalcolithic culture regions, a study of the distribution pattern of the sites suggests that the sites were of two types, regional centers and village settlements. वही जो primary और secondary sectors हैं. This difference or hierarchy has been taken to suggest that some form of administrative organization was definitely present. Regional centers क्या represent करते होंगे? The political headquarters of that particular region, right, was present in the Chalcolithic cultures. The presence of an administrative authority is further supported by the existence of certain distinct public structures such as fortifications, ramparts and moat, granaries, embankments and canals, which are all well documented at Inamgaon, etc., found at different sites, right? So this is indicative of the existence of a political system, that some form of administration was providing governance. What was the exact nature of the political system? That we do not know for sure. Okay? But one thing is clear, that as compared to the Harappan civilization, the amount of organized violence between the different communities, had it gone up or gone down? It had gone up. Okay? So these are the things to be kept in mind. Now, conclusion. Seen in the larger context of the post-Harappan developments, these Chalcolithic cultures betray discernible feature influences of the Harappan culture, although in a residual form. तो फुल फ्लेजेड कल्चर्स सिम्टम्स नहीं दिखते हैं, हरप्पन कल्चर के ट्रेट्स नहीं दिखते हैं, बट उनके रेजिडुअल फॉर्म में दिखते हैं. At the same time, they are marked by strong regional elements and also display trade links and cultural contacts between each other. These metal-using farming communities which flourished in the 2nd millennium BCE disappeared around the 1st millennium BCE, excepting the late Jorwe culture which continued till 700 BCE. What is the explanation behind this? Rising aridity. That has been the given most probable explanation. One possible reason attributed for such a decay was increasing aridity and unfavorable climatic conditions. Many of these settlements in the Godavari and Tapi and other valleys were deserted and were reoccupied after a gap of 6 or 5 centuries in the 4th, 5th centuries BCE, right? That is during the Mahajanpad period. After the second urbanization had already taken place in or already started in North India, tab the favorable conditions emerged for the settlement or for the emergence of settlements in the Godavari region, Godavari and Tapti river valleys, heralded by urbanization. Clear hai? Now, give the heading Decline of the Chalcolithic Age. Decline of the Chalcolithic Age. लिखो. The Chalcolithic cultures of central India and the Deccan flourished between the 3rd and 1st millenniums BCE of central India and the Deccan flourished between the 3rd and 1st millenniums BCE. 3rd and 1st millenniums BCE. Full stop. Subpoint. Some were contemporary of the Harappan civilization. Some were contemporary of the Harappan civilization, while some emerged later. While some emerged later. Full stop. Some characteristics of the Harappan culture were visible in all these cultures. But in a residual form. Full stop. Subpoint. This was probably a result of a lengthy process of cultural diffusion and ecological adaptation. All right. Next main point likho. Since climate played such an important role in determining the path of human development for all pre and even proto-historical cultures. Comma, the most feasible explanation the most feasible explanation for the decline of the Chalcolithic cultures, for the decline of the Chalcolithic cultures, was what? Was climate change. Was climate change. Full stop. Subpoint. Paleobotanists, paleobotanists and paleoclimatologists, along with paleohydrologists, have claimed that central and western India experienced a lengthy period of desiccation, DESSICATION. Desiccation का मतलब होता है gradually drying up, the onset of drier conditions. Desiccation, DESSICATION, of desiccation beginning from roughly 1000 BCE. Roughly 1000 BCE. Full stop. Next up point. In fact, comma, this corresponds to the cultural decay during the late Jorwe period. Full stop. Next point. Next main point. The dryland farming communities, of central India and the Deccan were not in a position to withstand this climatic shock. And were gradually deserted. ठीक है? So the idea is जितने भी cultural zones थे, people over here were surviving as part of an elaborate system. There was a fine balance between the supply and demand for food, availability of animal resources, and the number of humans that were inhabiting. There were crucial economic interlinkages between not only different cultural clusters, but also within different regions. One of them collapses, the chances of the other surviving are also going to decline, because it was derived many of its commodities that it needed to survive from those other cultures. तो उसमें से उस पूरी मशीनरी में से एक पुर्जा भी टूट जाता है, सो द एंटायर मशीनरी इज गोइंग टू ब्रेक डाउन. ठीक है. व्हाट इज द लास्ट लाइन? Gradually deserted. Full stop. Next point. With this, the entire machinery of material production and exchange on which the Chalcolithic culture was based, comma, broke down. Resulting in its decline. Okay. Now, what would happen to the people who had deserted their semi-arid and arid homelands? They are going to migrate towards more productive regions. And where would this migration bring them finally? In the Gangetic Valley, right? And over here, they are going to start coming into contact with new groups of people. First of all, the native Neolithic, Chalcolithic cultures, such as the cultures of Chirand culture, right? Settlements of Chirand culture. And from around 1000 BC, only new groups of Aryans who till now were limited to the northwestern region, they also started to migrate eastwards. Okay, write down. Next point. With this, comma, they began migrating northwards, comma, coming into contact with the native Neolithic, Chalcolithic cultures, as well as the eastward migrating Aryans. The eastward migrating Aryans. Full stop. This was the final step. Towards the emergence of the second urbanization. This was the final step towards the emergence of the second urbanization. This migration that we are talking about, the coming into contact of these three distinct groups. Why? The Chalcolithic cultures of central India and the Deccan brought with them their own set of knowledge, such as dry land farming, such as use of animal manure, such as the use of animal power for farming activities, such as let us see, और क्या different kinds of manufacturing and construction technology, etc. Right? The Chalcolithic communities of the Gangetic Valley brought their own unique knowledge, such as wet paddy transplantation, and the Vedic Aryans brought their own knowledge. They first of all brought Sanskritic culture, horse riding, advanced understanding of animal husbandry, etc. And all of this merged together to provide favorable conditions, especially given the favorable climatic conditions of the Gangetic Valley at that point of time, to create even better understanding of, or to create a number of technological improvements. So this brought about an economic revolution, so to speak of. And from the later Vedic age onwards, that is from around 1000 BC onwards, in North India, there was a material transformation as well. Kya shuru hua? Iron Age started. Copper Age came to an end. Iron Age started, right? And this completely revolutionized the economic landscape. Iron could be used for clearing forests also, and for making weapons also, weapons which were much more durable than weapons of the previous period, right? And as a result of this, economic productivity also increased, and the ability of a few strong groups or individuals to exert control over a large region, over a large number of people. So the concept of monarchy, the ideas of statehood, etc., they also started to develop. And this was the stepping stone towards the second urbanization. That is why we are saying that this migration represented the final step towards India's second urbanization. Clear hai? Now, take down a question. लिखिए. The transition of the human condition, लिख देता हूं मैं यहाँ पर. The transition of the human condition from the prehistoric to the proto-historic age is aptly demonstrated by the emergence of Chalcolithic cultures in central India and the Deccan. Full stop. Analyze. $200 words, 15 marks. Question समझ में आया है? What do we need to do over here? दो आर्ग्यूमेंट्स प्रेजेंट करने हैं. क्या क्या? दैट एक तो ये जो स्टेटमेंट है ये सही है, दूसरा कि ये सही नहीं है, इसमें कुछ लिमिटेशंस हैं. कैसे आर्ग्यू करोगे कि ये सही है? यू विल हैव टू शो चेंजेस इन दी subsistence pattern as compared to the Neolithic age. You will have to show changes in the technology, or instead of changes, I should say improvements. You'll have to showcase changes in the settlement and dwelling pattern. You'll have to show changing complexity of social, economic, and political structures. You'll have to underline the changes in the religious beliefs and systems. You'll have to underline the changes and or improvements when it comes to pottery making, when it comes to exchange, एटसेट्रा. ठीक है, तो अलग अलग पैरामीटर्स में आपको चेंजेस या इंप्रूवमेंट्स को अंडरलाइन करना पड़ेगा. दिस इज गोइंग टू बी दी फर्स्ट पार्ट ऑफ योर आंसर. ठीक है, एंड देन सेकेंड पार्ट ऑफ योर आंसर क्या करना होगा? यू विल हैव टू हाईलाइट दी limitations, right? So limitations as compared to what, or in relation to what? देखो क्वेश्चन क्या बोल रहा है, प्री हिस्टोरिक से प्रोटो हिस्टोरिक की जर्नी को कैप्चर करने के लिए बेस्ट थिंग टू अंडरस्टैंड इज टू अंडरस्टैंड द इमर्जेंस ऑफ कैल्कोलिथिक कल्चर्स ऑफ सेंट्रल इंडिया एंड द डेक्कन, राइट? अब प्रोटो हिस्टोरिक कल्चर का ग्रेटेस्ट रिप्रेजेंटेशन क्या है इंडियन हिस्ट्री में? हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन. So you should now start comparing the material conditions of the Chalcolithic cultures to the Harappan civilization. Limitations with respect to Harappan civilization. So once again, किसके बेसिस पे करोगे कि भाई ये रूरल थे, ठीक है, हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन कंप्लीटली अर्बनाइज था. एज कंपेयर टू द हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन द लेवल ऑफ सोशियो इकोनॉमिक deprivation was much higher, poverty was much higher. As compared to the Harappan civilization, the level of technological know-how was much worse. ठीक है, as compared to the Harappan civilization where the use of the script was widespread, यहाँ पे नहीं होता था. While the Harappan civilization traded extensively, not only with the Indian cultures but also with overseas civilizations. यहाँ पे ट्रेड का वॉल्यूम और स्कोप दोनों लिमिटेड था. है कि नहीं? ठीक है, तो इसके अलावा और भी कई सारी लिमिटेशंस आप हाईलाइट कर सकते हो. सो दैट इज व्हाट यू नीड टू डू. और नेक्स्ट टास्क क्या बच गया आपका कि पता करना है इंट्रोडक्शन कहाँ से होना चाहिए, कंक्लूजन कहाँ से होना चाहिए. ना अब ये बताओ कि पहले पार्ट में इसको आपने आर्ग्यू किया है, सेकंड पार्ट में ये बताया है, तो कंक्लूजन किस नोट पे करना होगा? इसको एनालाइज करना है ना, ये क्रिटिकली एनालाइज, जो भी मतलब सेम मतलब होता है दोनों का, राइट? तो कैसे लाओगे, एंड पोर्शन पे क्या लिखोगे? तो हम सामने ये बोल सकते हैं that despite these limitations which make it clear that the level of material and cultural advancement of the Chalcolithic culture was nowhere close to the Harappan civilization. But at the same time, we must not forget that this was the final stage before the emergence of सेकेंड अर्बनाइजेशन. ठीक है, तो हम क्यों केवल फर्स्ट अर्बनाइजेशन से कंपेयर कर रहे हैं? वाई नॉट ट्राई टू ड्रॉ द लिंक बिटवीन द कैलकुलिथिक कल्चर एंड द सेकेंड अर्बनाइजेशन. ठीक है, एंड इन दिस सिनेरियो it becomes even more apparent that had the Chalcolithic culture not preserved the technological and social know-how and culture of the Harappan people, the second urbanization would have been much delayed. ठीक है, तो ये हम हाईलाइट कर सकते हैं. यहां पे तो हो गया आपका कंक्लूजन. इंट्रोडक्शन अब बताओ कैसे करोगे? कई तरीके हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल देखो, आपको यहाँ पे ये लिखना है ना, चेंजेस या इंप्रूवमेंट्स हाईलाइट करना है. तो जो इंट्रोडक्शन का लास्ट पोर्शन है दैट शुड एंड विद दिस थिंग कि देयर वर अ नंबर ऑफ इंप्रूवमेंट्स ओवर द नियोलिथिक एज. अभी क्या बताओगे? Chalcolithic age represents the next stage of cultural evolution after the Neolithic age. In Central India and the Deccan, Chalcolithic cultures emerged between the 3rd and 1st millenniums BCE. However, and as such, these Chalcolithic cultures displayed significant improvements over the Neolithic age. नेमली ये आप फिर एन्यूमरेट करोगे, एक्सपैंड करोगे. ठीक है, सो दिस इज द वे इन विच यू कैन कंस्ट्रक्ट एन आंसर. डिटेल में मैंने जानबूझ के आंसर नहीं बताया है. आई वांट यू टू अटेम्प्ट इट ऑन योर ओन. एक क्वेरी आया है. How you understand that question is also needed limitation as I am unable to get this demand. However, part 1 I am able to catch in the demand. So that we get from this. So हर क्वेश्चन का कोई ना कोई कमांड वर्ड होता है. इफ इट इज नॉट फ्रेम्ड इन द टर्म्स ऑफ अ प्रॉपर क्वेश्चन विद अ क्वेश्चन मार्क, तो ज्यादातर में एंड में आपको इस तरह का एक कीवर्ड या फिर कमांड वर्ड मिलता है. देखो, कीवर्ड या कमांड वर्ड क्या क्या हो सकते हैं? दे कैन बी कॉमेंट, इलैबोरेट, illustrate, illuminate, etc. सबका मतलब एक ही होता है क्या? एक्सप्लेन, विद एग्जाम्पल्स. ठीक है. सेकेंडली, you can have analyze, critically analyze, critically discuss, critically examine, etc. In all these cases, what do we need to do? We need to carry out a debate. ठीक है, so you need to argue in favor of the basic framework of the question and you need to argue against. ठीक है, so debate होगा in which you will have to undertake the process of validation or verification, and on the basis of this entire process you will then need to come to a conclusion whether the predicate of the statement is valid or invalid. ठीक है, and then एक टाइप ऑफ कमांड वर्ड्स होते हैं जो इन दोनों के बीच के होते हैं. ये स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड है, यहाँ पे डिबेट करना है और कुछ बीच में होंगे. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, डिस्कस हो गया, डिबेट हो गया, एंड अदर्स लाइक दिस, फॉर एग्जाम्पल कॉमेंट क्रिटिकली और क्रिटिसाइज और वैलिडेट और जस्टिफाई, ये सब हो गए। तो इसमें नेगेटिव और पॉजिटिव कॉन्टेशन भी हो सकते हैं, न्यूट्रल भी हो सकता है। डिस्कस और डिबेट करना है तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल question may be with regards to a particular theory, right? Now you'll have to present arguments in favor of and against that theory. उस theory के आगे और आपको theories बताने की जरूरत नहीं है. You have to contain your discussion only to that particular theory. Comment critically का मतलब criticize ही होता है. You have to argue against the framework or the predicate. Validate, justify same होते हैं. That means you have to validate whatever has been suggested by the examiner, by the question maker. ठीक है? So these are the ones which fall in the middle category. समझ में आया? Because the question is asking me to analyze, I know that I will have to debate this predicate. ठीक है शुभ्रनिल? All right. चलिए then. So that is it, I believe. Chalcolithic age हमने I think cover कर लिया है. Couple of questions. How can pottery be used as a source of human history during the Chalcolithic period? Okay, ये discuss हो गया यहाँ पर. Anything else? The emergence of non-Harappan Chalcolithic cultures in central India and the Deccan mark a change not only in the subsistence pattern of the people but an overall transition from prehistoric to protohistoric period critically analyzed. बहुत मिलता जुलता सवाल है जो अभी हमने डिस्कस किया है. Both these questions I think we have already discussed. Right? So that is it. Chalcolithic age हमने कवर कर लिया है. वैदिक पीरियड के आप लोगों के पास नोट्स मिल गए होंगे, अभी आ गए हैं, नहीं आए हैं? तो एक बार देखिएगा. एंड कल हम लोग वैदिक एज को शुरू करते हैं. ठीक है? एनी डाउट्स? नहीं? चलिए फिर कल बात होती है. ऑल राइट शुभ्रानिल. हाँ, अभी क्लास के बाद while I am driving back home तब बात करते हैं. ठीक है?